marks of things that are happening in the world. Anybody remember Isaiah's two sons? Yeah, Sher Jashub and Meher Shalal Hashbaz. And the Lord talks about these guys. There's Sher Jashub, and then his other son in Isaiah chapter 8, Meher Shalal Hashbaz. And the Lord says to Isaiah that he and his sons, let's see if I can find it, I think it's verse 17 or 18. I and the children whom the Lord hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts which dwelleth in Mount Zion. So often the Lord will pick people or places which are set as signs or wonders for Israel. And it doesn't make them special, it makes them a type and a shadow of things past and things to come. There's another example in the book of Ezekiel where the Lord uses these two sisters named Aholah and Aholibah. And so the Lord will often take a place, like Utah, and a place like the United States, and he will make them a type and a wonder for signs to people in his kingdom. And if you follow those signs and those wonders, they can help you see what's coming. So tonight we're going to do a little bit of that as we explore some events that happened in the United States and also in Utah that I think serve as signs and wonders for Israel. So let's jump back over here. Now, last night we touched on the Apocrypha just a little bit. If you took did we look at the Apocrypha in the Bible dictionary? We didn't look at the definition. This is my last presentation in Australia tonight, and so sometimes I think that I've covered something with you that I probably didn't. So if you go back here to your scripture tab, to get there, all you got to do is hit that little set of books down there at the bottom left-hand corner. Go to your scriptures, head to your study helps, and there in your study helps is the Bible dictionary, third one over from the top. You click on that, and you'll get a alphabet over on your right-hand side. You can click any of those letters to go right to a certain letter, but we just need to stay in the A's, and we're going to look at the Apocrypha. And we're going to look at the Apocrypha right now because we're following a journey in the scriptures that prophesy of future events if we liken them to ourselves. And the Apocrypha is right here. See in the Bible dictionary, it means secret or hidden. And they are the subject of a revelation recorded in D&C 91 in which it is stated that the contents are mostly correct, but with many interpolations by man. Now look at what it says right here. Among these books, the following are of special value. First book of Esdras and the second book of Esdras. Now this becomes really quite important to our study of the scriptures because in the book of Daniel, we get a picture of these four different beasts who come up out of the sea. And one of them is likened to a lion. Now look where they come from, see, up from the sea. And notice that they are diverse from one another. Okay, so has anybody read Revelation 12 and 13? And do you see the similarities between these beasts in Revelation? What's the difference between the one in Revelation and the one here, or the four here? The one in Revelation appears to not be diverse from one another. It appears to be connected together. So that might give us an indication that Daniel is doing something similar to Nephi. He's come up to the edge of John's vision. He's not really supposed to intrude on John's vision, so he's taking things from his time and that look similar to John's vision to help you have an interpretive aid for Revelation chapter 12 and 13 to better prepare you for what is coming in that final time in which the seventh trumpet blows and the mystery of God is finished, as it says in Revelation 10:7. So the first one is like a lion, the second one is like a bear, and the third one is like a leopard, and then a fourth beast, but Daniel is not given the image or the identification of this beast. And this makes the Apocrypha particularly important because the Apocrypha actually reveals the identity of that beast. So if we were to go over to the King James Version, now the Apocrypha, did I talk about how it used to be in the Bible last night?
Yes.
Okay. The Apocrypha used to be in the Bible. They took it out in the 1800s by vote of the Church of England and a Lutheran, I think it was a Lutheran campaign in the United States, and they just voted it out, took it out of your scriptures. But if you were to go back and get an early 1800s, 1700s King James Version of the Bible or a Geneva Bible, the Apocrypha would be in it. So we don't have this today in our current Bible, and Joseph Smith's Bible would have had the Apocrypha in it. So look at what Esdras says. Esdras is the Greek version of Ezra of the Old Testament. It's the same guy. And look at verse 11. The eagle who Ezra saw is the kingdom seen in the vision of thy brother Daniel. So this, all of a sudden, Esdras becomes this piece of information that is necessary for us to understand Daniel chapter 7. So, excuse me, if we go back here and look at this, right, how can we continue our journey through Daniel if we never stop to go identify this other beast in Ezra? It almost makes second Esdras and second Esdras apocalyptic vision kind of mandatory reading for the book of Daniel, but it's gone. And if you're anything like me, you didn't even know that. Like, I had no idea until I read a book by a guy named Michael B. Rush called The Remnant Shall Return, where he kind of laid out this parable of Ezra's eagle. And I was like, why? How did I not know this before? And it's just not something I think we talk about too often. But we also have it right there in D&C 91, right, where the Lord basically tells Joseph, don't translate it. Let the people go and figure that out for themselves. So we kind of have to stop right here in Daniel. And remember in Daniel chapter 2 how Daniel seemed to carry us in Daniel chapter 2 to about 1844. And then we took a peek at Ezekiel chapter 17, and we saw that word that was that he was carried to a place of merchants and in the land of Canaan. And Nauvoo was called commerce before it was changed to the name of Nauvoo. So Daniel appears to kind of carry us, as does Ezekiel, into around 1847 to 1896. Remember, we talked about Elder Anthony Lund's statement in 1897 where he said this is our Jubilee year, kind of following that cycle that appears to start in Revelation chapter 12. Well, if all these guys are kind of bringing us into the restoration period of the church, doesn't that make sense? And wouldn't that be what, if these prophets are saying to the Lord, will you please tell us about your latter day coming, don't you think forefront to that revelation would be the restoration of the church between 1820 and 1844, and then the journey of the saints to Utah between 1847 and 1896? Well, Daniel then and Ezra will kind of pick up after that moment. And it kind of looks like Daniel and Ezra are seeing the early 1900s to 1930s of United States America. Now, why? Well, first of all, if we look at 2nd Esdras chapter 11, which is where the vision of the eagle is given, notice what he says here. There came up from the sea an eagle. Now, an eagle in the Latin Vulgate, which is the earliest transcript of this that we have, is Aquila, A-Q-U-I-L-A. Now, just use some of your Latin or Italian or Spanish speaking skills, and what is an Aquila? It's a water-based creature, right? A-Q-U, aqua. So why would Ezra care to tell us that an aqua-based creature came out of the aqua? Right? It's kind of repetitive. Now maybe he's just doing that because maybe that's what the Latin translators are doing, but when you When you actually ask Google, what is a sea eagle? Look at what you get. A couple examples of what a sea eagle looks like. And one of them is a bald eagle. It is a sea eagle. And that just so happens to be the mascot of the United States. It almost wasn't. Anybody know what it almost was? A turkey. Benjamin Franklin wanted a turkey. It would have been a totally different country. Australia would have rose to a world superpower instead of the United States. I guess we should have saved that mascot actually for the end. Like right about now, we could adopt that and it would work. Okay, so we go to 2 Ezra chapter 11, and we're going to read about this eagle. There came up from the sea an eagle which had 12 feathered wings and 3 heads. And she spread her wing over all the earth. Now I personally, this is just me, I believe that's a mistranslation. No other beast in Scripture is defined as a she. They are all he's. And so I think what has happened here, and I have a theory on this, and I think it's probably wrong, okay? But in verse 1, when we see the first translation of the 3 heads, and a little bit later on when we see the translation of the heads, the center head appears to be a she. And so I think what's happened is you have a mistaken translation of the whole beast being called a she when maybe only the center head is, and there's also some grammar rules in Latin and Greek that are a lot different than they are in English. And it wouldn't be hard to confuse the gender of this eagle or to see that the center head is a female and that the rest of the body is male. Now, that's maybe not important, but I say it because a lot of times what I found is that the Lord's prophecies fulfill themselves in ways I can't predict. And they always seem to turn out different than what I predict. So if I get a hard line opinion on what I think a prophecy means, then I'm not flexible enough to see what the Lord will actually do with the Scriptures when they are fulfilled. So just be careful, right? As you read these prophecies throughout all Scripture, let the Spirit guide you, and don't get so hard-headed that you marry an interpretation that when you're wrong, you think it's now blown. Because you'll find that after the Lord does fulfill the prophecy, you can kind of look back and say, oh, I get it. I should have seen that. Why didn't I see that before? So this eagle is very powerful. Out of her feathers grew contrary feathers, which are referred to as little feathers and small. So we now have 2 names for a different type of feather. We'll get normal feathers, and we will get these little, small, or contrary feathers also. Notice what her heads are doing in verse 4. The heads are at rest. The middle is greater than the other, but it rests with the other 2 heads. The eagle flew. With her feathers and rained upon the earth. Okay, so now we know this beast, this latter-day beast, is an eagle. It has 3 heads, which appear to be quite powerful, but do not manifest themselves at first. They are at rest. And whoever this eagle is, it has power over the whole earth. So we need a country in the latter days that has power over the earth, represented by an eagle, and has what appears to be a powerful force underlying it or overseeing it that's not readily apparent because they're at rest. Notice verse 9, the heads are to be preserved for the last, but the voice goes not out of the heads, but from the midst of the body. Now, that kind of sounds like a democratic process to me. The heads are kind of sound a little bit like a shadowy government kind of waiting in the wings, and the people think they have power, but maybe don't really have power. Now, the first feather that rules is going to step up in verse 12 on the right side and reign over all the earth. And its end will come, and it will appear no more, so that the next stands up, and it has a great time. Now, one of the problems that we have with the word great, let's jump out here to Webster's 1828 dictionary. I would highly recommend you download Webster's 1828 dictionary to your phone. Joseph Smith, Royal Skousen, let's start with Royal Skousen, did a study. He was a BYU scholar who studied the Book of Mormon and the language of the Book of Mormon. And he came to the conclusion that the Book of Mormon was written in 16th century English, much like the King James Version of the Bible. Well, in the time that Joseph is receiving the plates and translating the plates, Noah Webster is feeling inspired in America to write a dictionary of the American language and will publish his first most popular dictionary in 1828, the very time that Joseph is translating the Book of Mormon. So what does that make Webster's 1828? A contemporary dictionary to Joseph Smith and the translation. So if you ever wanted to maybe get an idea of what a word might have meant in 1820 to 1828, when Joseph is actually translating the Book of Mormon, you could go to the dictionary of a guy who says, hey, God inspired me to make this dictionary. And you could look up the word great. Now this is also kind of important because if you go to the book of Ether, you'll learn about a nation called the Jaredite nation, and God said he would make them the greatest nation. And you look at that and you think, how can that be? Like, America invented nuclear bombs and flies around the world. But what if great doesn't really mean what we think it is? It means large in bulk or dimension, extended length or breadth, a great distance. What if the Jaredites just basically occupied all the Polynesian Isles, all of America, all of South America, and maybe even a lot of Indonesia? That would make them the largest in territory of any nation ever in the history of the world. And if you kind of apply that lesson and start to look at those places, you'll see some interesting things in there in the archaeological record. So if we look at it from that perspective, this country, or this second feather, his great time will be probably some form of duration that is different than everybody else. So we'll get the qualifier on that. Look at verse 16. Remember where the voice comes from in verse 15. The voice comes from the body. A voice comes up and says, hear thou that is born, rule over the earth so long, this I say, before thou beginnest to appear no more. Now, what does that tell you? Before he leaves office, the body will rise up and say, there shall none after thee attain unto thy time, neither unto the half thereof. Now, there's only one place that could happen. There's only one person in any nation represented by an eagle that could fulfill that right there, and it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who serves 4 terms as a U.S. president, and before he leaves office, the people through Congress will vote that no president thereafter will ever attain to more than 2 terms. Exactly like Ezra says. Now we can test this, and we can go backwards from FDR, and we can look and see if the feather before FDR was from the right. And it was Herbert Hoover, and he was a Republican. He rose up on the right, FDR rose up from the left. FDR served 4 terms, and from that point on, no president would ever be allowed to serve more than 4 terms in the United States. Verse 18, there arose a third, and he appeared no more. So it went with, let's do that. So it went with all the residue, one after another, as that every one reigned, and then appeared no more. Then and beheld, and lo, in process of time, the feathers that followed stood up on the right. Notice the side, that they might rule, and some of them ruled, but within a while they appeared no more. For some of them were set up, but ruled not. What does that seem to imply? Some Republicans are going to get office. They're going to, what's that? Yeah, they'll basically be figureheads. They'll be put there, but they're not really going to rule. Now, the reason I really paid attention to this is because in this vision, Ezra, when the eagle confronts this lion in the end of the vision, the lion will call all the feathers wicked. And when my wife and I were talking about this, she was like, oh, I kind of liked Ronald Reagan. And I was like, oh yeah, I kind of did too. And so I thought, I went back and I looked at it again, and I saw that about how some would be set up, but they wouldn't reign. And I found that guy right there. And I actually knew one of his top advisors. He was a good friend of mine. He lived out in a town near me. He passed away in 2020, but he served Reagan for 7 years. And he served in many different areas, and he was the kind of guy that was like a collector and a historian and a scholar and a philosopher. He was a member of the church. He had, I mean, this is just some of the things he had. He had like the pistols of the Hessian general who surrendered to George Washington. Like he had those kinds of things, and he had letters written by George Washington. He was just this amazing guy, and he told me this story about how Reagan became president, and how Reagan was at convention or going into convention. He didn't have a vice presidential pick, but the one thing that he had sworn to all his staff is that the one guy he would never pick as his vice president was George H.W. Bush. And all of a sudden, Reagan came to the team and he said, I have to pick George H.W. Bush. And they were so disappointed because they all just didn't like him. And he said that Reagan had been told that if he didn't pick George H.W. Bush, he would never become president of the United States. So I don't know if that means anything, right? But it was interesting to hear that story from my friend Ron Mann was his name, and to contemplate it in context of this parable in Ezra's Eagle. So what happens then is we run through, by verse 22, 12 feathers, and they will appear no more. And notice what happens at the end of the sentence in 22. It adds 2 feathers, 2 of the contrary or little feathers. So something about 2 of the 14 first feathers appears to be different. And whether it means they are kind of oppositional, or maybe they're called short, maybe their time is cut short, we can actually see that in if we lay it out, right? So if we say that there's the beast, and we start to go number 1 being Herbert Hoover, 2 FDR, and we go down until we get to number 5, we get the first feather whose time is cut short. He's assassinated. And interestingly, not to propose a conspiracy theory tonight, okay? But interestingly, that guy right there is shot and killed in the congressional district in which this guy is the congressman. Afterwards, he'll become the head of the CIA and become Ronald Reagan's vice president, and take America into war in the Gulf War in 1991-92. The next short feather that we get, or appear to get, is right up there. Richard Nixon, during his second term, he will be impeached and resign from office. And then we run through, just as Ezra predicts, through 14 total feathers, ending with that one right there. And strangely enough, not only does Ezra's eagle have these 3 mysterious heads that wait for the end, but America has an executive branch, a judicial branch, a legislative branch, a president who gives a State of the Union, and when he does, he sits on the dais next to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate during those State of the Union speeches. And we have right side politics and left side politics. And Ezra seems to get all of that right in this image that he puts in 2 Ezra chapter 11. Well, once we're finished with these 14 feathers, I want to point out, notice we get 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. Right? That's, Americans think they're free, right? We're so free that we get to pick between 2 parties. That's like getting to pick between 2 companies and calling yourself fortunate. And we call that freedom. And we got 7 of each. Right? How free that we get 7 of each. And so we go back to Ezra, we take a look at that. He says that As I looked, the 12 feathers appeared no more, nor the 2 little feathers. Verse 22. There was no more upon the eagle's body but 3 heads and 6 little wings. Okay, so what's that tell you by this point? If Ezra is correct, all that's left in this beast kingdom are 6 wings and 3 heads. That's 9 leaders left. Okay, we've already cycled through almost the entire thing. So let's look at what happens. Ezra then says, I saw 2 little feathers divide themselves from the 6 and remain under the head that was upon the right side, for the 4 continued in their place. So now we're down to 7. Because the 2 have broken off and settled themselves under the right head. Now, what will be said later in Ezra's prophecy is that those 2 little feathers will rule over a smaller and divided kingdom. And what does that seem to imply? I'm not sure.
Civil war.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we are seeing some bad polarization in America right now. Okay, and he says, and I beheld, and lo, the feathers that were under the wing thought to set themselves up and to have the rule. And I beheld, and lo, there was one set up, but shortly it appeared no more. Now that, I've looked at that over and over. I've looked at that with some friends who speak Italian. I've looked at the Latin, and there's some interesting language about shortly it appeared no more. I'm not sure that's translated correctly. I'm not really qualified to say, but I can look at it and say it looks a little funny. And the second was sooner away than the first. Okay, so now we've got 7 left and 2 down. And then he says, I beheld, and lo, the 2 that remained of the 4 kind of contrary feathers, the 4 small feathers, that when they thought to rule, the heads wake up, they join together, and they turn together and eat up the 2 feathers under the wing. Now look at that language again. They thought to reign, and they eat up the feathers under the wing that would have reigned. And what does that mean? Does it mean they don't ever take office? Does it mean they do and then they're eaten up? Now, we get an interpretation in chapter 12, and if I remember correctly, Ezra implies that they are kind of removed from the scene. So if we go back to this picture, remember after the 14 feathers, we get the first contrary feather, right there. And we get the second contrary feather. Now, you look at those guys and they basically represent American polarization right now, right? And I would argue one's obviously gone. One was gone shortly after he took office and didn't really reign at all. And I don't say that as an insult. I think it's kind of obvious. And I actually think it's kind of cruel what we are doing to pretend in the United States that all is well. And then we get these other 2 where it says they thought to reign and they were eaten up. So now we are dangerously close to the ones that are left for the end. And if we go back and take a look, and I'll show you why this is quite concerning to me, because I don't know how to interpret this, right? I can have my own theories, but I don't get to pick how this plays out in God's way. But I'll show you a little bit why this is a little troubling. Okay, the head in the midst suddenly appeared no more, like as the wings. But there remained 2 heads, which also in like sort ruled upon the earth and over those that dwelt therein. And I beheld, and lo, the head upon the right devoured it that was on the left. So you see who becomes the winner? The right head wins. And the right head is now going to basically rule over the whole earth or over a fairly broken kingdom, because I'm not sure that that ending sounds very healthy, right? One suddenly disappears, one of them appears to kill the other one, or does something to devour it. And then we get a lion, verse 37, chased out of the wood, and he sent out a man's voice and said, Hear thou, I will talk with thee. And the highest shall say unto thee, Art not thou it that remainest of the four beasts, whom I made to reign in my world, that the end of their times might come through them? And the fourth came and overcame all beasts that were past, and had power over the world with great fearfulness, and over the whole compass of the earth with much wicked oppression. That's not a good thing. And it's kind of, when you tell this to a bunch of Americans, it's not very comfortable to look at your country and have the Lord be saying that about your country. And it changed my dynamic, or the way I looked at politics. It helped me to get out of my political mindset and try to come to a more religious and spiritual mindset and think of the Lord as my salvation rather than my participation in some particular party. And I understood a lot better why the church doesn't get political. Why would they? Why would the church rely upon a political party to do for them what the Lord has promised to do? Now, let's go take a look at that picture, and I want to kind of give you a theory, probably wrong, okay? But I go through this for the exercise of showing how quickly civilization can come to an end, like it did in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so just assume for a second that that this guy is not of total mental faculty. Okay, no joke. I'm not joking. I'm just like trying to kind of. There's a legal procedure that kicks in if that's true, right? And this is not politics. This is just simple legalities in American law, where if he is not, then certain things trigger, and somebody else is in charge. So who would be in charge? The vice president, right? That's who it would go to. Well, strangely enough, Ezra Ziegel appears to indicate that the center head is female. So if that's already occurred, we're already at the center head. And now you go to the book of Revelation, and remember the woman who sits atop the beast in Revelations, and they don't like the woman, so the beast devours or tries to get rid of her. And back in the George W. Bush administration, Dick Cheney gave a public interview where he said America had set up what was called a continuity of government program, a backup executive branch that could take over if America ever had a continuity of government problem. So during COVID, we went into martial law in much of the United States. And that can do things where there's no transparency, no accountability, no oversight because of trigger laws and trigger mechanisms in statute. So, I have no idea what's going on, right? I don't even know how to keep track of that anymore, but you can kind of see how the Lord might fulfill things in ways that I can't even comprehend. And it's also possible that we're just still here with this guy and we haven't even seen those two yet. But if, the Lord works in mysterious ways, then it's also possible that we're already on that left head over there. And in the book of Revelation, do you remember that beast in Revelation 13, and one of the heads is wounded to death and it's miraculously healed? Okay, which side's the right and which side's the left? And who's won the right side in American politics today? A guy who nobody thought would ever be able to run for office again, let alone win the presidency again. And what if we are ready for the right head and the next president becomes the right head? Now you see how fast all of a sudden you're at the end, just like that, right? And if the Book of Mormon kind of teaches us something, well, let's go back and take a look at this. I created another one of those tags at my homepage. Let's go here, just hit home, go down to your, if you ever want to make these, you just go down to your tags section. And I called it, what did I call that? I promise it's there somewhere. Timing, there it is. Thus we see how quick the children of men do forget the Lord their God, how quick to do iniquity and to be led away by the evil one. Moroni 9, O my beloved son, how can a people like this that are without civilization and only a few years have passed away and they were a civil and delightsome people. Helaman 4, for behold, they saw that the strength of the Lamanites was as great as their strength. Thus they had fallen into this transgression in the space of not many years. Helaman 11:26, even in the space of not many years, they became an exceedingly great band of robbers. And so you see, the Book of Mormon's message is over and over that you're at this kind of maybe troublesome moment, and all of a sudden, within a couple of years, society completely falls apart and they become uncivilized. So, what do we do with that? I don't know, but I would say be prepared. Right? Always be prepared. Now, if we take Ezra and we look at that and we try to learn from that, we can go back to Daniel chapter 7. And if Daniel is seeing the same beast, eagle, that Ezra is, right? And again, this is a little bit of a leap, okay? So do with it as you will. What if, when Daniel sees the eagle, he sees the heads or the feathers as horns? Now, the reason I even started thinking about this is when you go to the Latin Vulgate version of 2nd Esdras chapter 11, which is the oldest copy of 2nd Esdras 11 that we have, the word is not really feather. So even the word feather that is used by Ezra is questionable. It's panarum, which means fin. So now picture a beast that's maybe associated with other beasts, that's not even really a beast, it's just a symbol of a latter-day kingdom. And one translation calls it a feather, one translation might call it a fin. And what would a fin look like on a dragon sea-like creature? Could it also be seen by another as a horn? I don't know, but it makes sense to me, right? If they're seeing the same thing. So all I would have to do is I'd have to look at the attributes of the one that Daniel wants us to pay attention to. Daniel wants us to pay attention to the little horn that comes up after the 10 horns. And the little horn, it says, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. Well, what does that mean? If we take Daniel 7:8 and we jump over to Bible Hub and we look at it maybe in the Hebrew, maybe we'll get a better picture of what that is. So we'll go Daniel. And bear with me. 7. And then if you download this app, you see where it says on the line of black letters, parallel sermons audio, we're going to select Hebrew. And we're going to get a side-by-side comparison of the English to the Hebrew. Another little one coming up. Among them and 3 of the horns, the first were plucked out by the roots. And there's our etymological study number right there from Strong's Concordance. There's the word in Hebrew. So we look at that kind of etymology of that word. Pulled out by the roots, plucked up, interesting term there, considering Ezra's eagle, rooted up. And, your guess as to that's the problem with Bible Hub is you get ads. Your guess is as good as mine what that means. But for some reason, when we look at this little horn, which appears to be the 11th, he has something to do with 3 before him. And whatever this little horn represents, look at what's going to come as a result of his reign. Now, what is that? What is verse 9? It's Adam-on-Diamond. So something about that little horn is indicative that between him and whatever comes after is going to, Daniel's seeing until Adam-on-Diamond. So he's correlating these things together for some reason. I beheld till the thrones were cast down. Now, you can read about that in the Doctrine and Covenants. Go to D&C 87, verse 6. Okay, remember he says, I beheld till thrones were cast down. Look at what D&C 87 is about. Okay, now why would it be important to go to this latter-day scripture as we look at Daniel? Right? If we want to use these scriptures for what I think the Lord gave them for, which is to prepare us for the second coming of the Lord, and for sharing the gospel throughout all the world to prepare the world for the second coming, then wouldn't it make sense that if it's placed in a time frame, a latter-day scripture might help us understand better what time frame we're talking about? So look at the first verse of this. This is the prophecy of the Civil War, right? Have you guys heard about this? Everybody know this? Okay, but notice how this is actually not a prophecy of the Civil War. Watch what happens when you use kind of proper English to understand this passage. Verily thus saith the Lord concerning the wars that will shortly come to pass. Okay, well, what wars? If you think that this is a prophecy on civil war, you've allowed a descriptor between the commas to overtake the purpose. The purpose of this is not to talk about the rebellion of South Carolina. The rebellion of South Carolina is just a descriptor between the commas about something else. And the something else is the wars that will shortly come to pass, which will eventually terminate in the death and misery of many souls. So this is a prophecy on the wars that will terminate in the death and misery of many souls. It's not a prophecy on the Civil War. Now, the other way we can know this is we can look at that. See the be shortly come to pass? Okay, see that? Did we cover President Hinckley's talk yesterday?
No.
Oh, wow. We might need to do a third night.
Tomorrow night's
we
free.
can't. Yeah, we can't, actually. But watch this also. So not only can you get a hint of what's being talked about here, which is a conversation between Moroni and Joseph Smith one night in Joseph's room, but you can also do another really awesome search, which I would highly recommend. Hit your little magnifying glass tab, put quotes around the term shortly come. Because I would argue that is a term of art in Scripture. And watch what happens. We're going to narrow this down to a scriptural search and look at where it appears first. It's a revelation to John, known as kind of the apocalyptic vision of things which must shortly come. Okay, now we go back, we look at 1 Nephi 22. We're going to find that real quick here. Behold, my brethren, I say unto you that these things must shortly come, yea, even blood and fire and vapor of smoke upon the face of this earth according to the flesh. That's Jacob's vision that we talked about relative to the Gentiles in the last days prior to the coming of the Lord. So are you noticing some, what attributes these share so far? Let's do it again here. Alma, holding forth things which must shortly come, yea, holding forth the coming of the Son of God. So you see how shortly come is a term of art? Every time it's used, it's talking about what? The coming of the Lord. So when we see this in D&C 87, sorry, I just picked the wrong one. Joseph is giving you a prophecy from the Lord on the very order of the things that must shortly come. And remember, we took off from, let's see, I got to remind myself of this so I don't forget. Daniel 7, we're talking about that little horn, till thrones were cast down and the Ancient of Days did sit. Okay, we want to figure out, what does it mean till thrones are cast down? And Joseph's going to give us that. So we get this entire prophecy, and it's going to give you the order. So the Civil War will kick off the things which must shortly come, and the time will come that war will be poured out upon all nations, not just America, everywhere, beginning at the Civil War, which starts with the southern states divided against the northern states, and the southern states will call on other nations, even Great Britain, to aid them in order to defend themselves against other nations, and then war will be poured out upon all nations. Now what happens here is you get the beginning of industrial warfare, and you get the beginning of alliances which lead to things like World War I and World War II, and NATO and the United Nations, and basically a whole new type of warfare in the world. And after many days, slaves shall rise up against their masters. Now I'm not going to do this tonight, but you can go find a quote by the football player apostle. Why can I not? Who is it? Yeah, Joseph Worthland. He has a quote where he says he doesn't think this has anything to do with the Civil War. He thinks this is the nations of the world that have never really been able to be free. And that when you see the nations of these kind of very tyrannical countries marshaling for war, then the people will rise up in those countries while they're out marshaling for war and going to war. And then you'll see the remnants who are left of the land, which is kind of a disturbing concept, because remnant means the portion that's left. They will marshal themselves, become exceeding angry, and vex the Gentiles. Well, that's you guys, and that's America. And this will lead to sword, bloodshed, mourning, famine, plagues, earthquakes, thunderings, fierce and vivid lightnings, until we get the consumption decree that makes a full end of all nations. Right, and that's how Joseph ties us in with Daniel chapter 7, and all of this will lead to Adam on Diamond, where Adam will sit as the Ancient of Days. And you can study the Doctrine and Covenants for more on that, and statements by Joseph Smith as well, and teachings of the prophet. So remember, we're seeing that this kind of kicks off. The last part of this kicks off with this little horn. And not only does the little horn have something to do with plucking up three before him, but Daniel will also say that before him, three will fall. So you've got three in the past that are affected by him, and three in the future that are affected by him. And I want to go back to this picture now, and I want to talk about who the 11 is in the order of American presidents if you start with Ezra's parable. The 11th president is George H.W. Bush. Now, if this comparison's valid, which, I don't get to say it is, but boy, it looks good, then this guy should have some attributes from Ezra's Eagle, having something to do with the 10th, 9th, 8th, 6th, 7th, and 5th presidents, or at least three of them, right? That he has something to do with plucking up three before him, and he subdues three after him. And if there's one thing that George H.W. Bush has in common with Clinton, Bush, and Obama, it is a policy of Middle Eastern war. And not just Middle Eastern war, but it's under Bush Sr. that the policies of privacy under the Constitution and First Amendment rights start to go away in the United States. And I'm not I'm not taking a political side on that, Kay. It's just the way it is. And what we see is we see kind of a foreign war starting, followed by under the Clinton administration, a focus on domestic terrorism, followed by a George W. Bush administration focused on foreign terrorism, followed by an Obama administration focused on domestic terrorism. And by bouncing back and forth between foreign terrorism and domestic terrorism, what you get is an erosion of privacy rights, and the United States begins to take to itself the right to surveil American citizens and people outside the United States. In fact, I think you even have a big place in the center of your country that we're attached to, where we monitor everything you do. You're welcome. So these are subtle things, right? If we're always looking for our version of the way things should be fulfilled, and this is mine, right? So take it with a grain of salt. But if we're always looking for our vision of how things should be fulfilled, you get these fantastic conspiracy theories that arise up throughout the world that I think are, they're fun for sure, but sometimes they're unnecessary because evil often accomplishes itself just by apathy and by very subtle changes in the law. And if you study the War of Captain Moroni goes against kingmen, and if you look at the beginning of that fight, it says that the kingmen sought to make subtle changes to the law. That was it. And the war starts over these minor changes in the law. And I would argue that's actually how nations really fall, is apathy over time, when people dedicate themselves to a right side or a left side instead of God's side, where people become too concerned with other things rather than God's kingdom. So Daniel basically says that from this point in time, the horn will make war with the saints and prevail. And he'll prevail, right? And if the horn is just part of the beast, then the horn can go away, and guess what continues under the beast? The war against the saints. And the beast prevails. And the beast prevails until Adam-on-Diamond. So should we be surprised, right, if we see a COVID moment where the church subjects itself to the demands of government? Not at all, right? That's exactly what appears to be prophesied in Scripture, is that the church will have to subject itself in the latter days to a beast kingdom, or what happens to the church? The church is what in Scripture? A woman. Now, if you've heard one of my presentations, you've heard this before, but I'll say it again, probably over and over and over. Ladies, think about your strapping husband next to you, and you're asleep at night, and you hear somebody break in downstairs. This isn't going to go so well in Australia because you guys probably don't have a handgun by the side of the bed, but I'm going to use that as an example anyway. A cricket bat, okay? The cricket bat.
On the woman's side.
So you hear something.
You gotta borrow it.
You hear something go bump in the night, you look at the camera that's on your phone these days, right? And you see this ninja downstairs, black hood stealing your stuff, and your husband grabs the cricket bat and hands it to you and runs into the closet. What are you thinking about your husband at that moment? And that's what we do to the church when we expect the church to fight our political battles for us. The church is the woman. We're supposed to protect the church. We're supposed to fight the battles for the church so that the church can do the job the Lord has given it. We're the ones who are supposed to create a political atmosphere in which the church can thrive. And if you go back and read Elder Hale's 2015 talk on religious freedom, you'll hear Elder Hale's in conference prior to his death giving a plea to the saints to organize together to defend religious freedom in 2015. Now, Daniel will see amazing things. And if we jump over to Daniel chapter 12, let me make sure I want to go there first. Yeah, let's go to Daniel chapter 12. Because Daniel's going to help us jump straight into our time And we're not going to stay there. We're going to jump back, but I want you to see Daniel because we probably won't come back to it. Daniel says, right, look at this, at that time shall Michael stand up. Right, so Daniel's seeing all the way to Adam-ondi-Ahman, but he's going to give us another clue about things that happened before that. I think we did cover this last night, didn't we? From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. From the closing of the temples on March 26th to October 7th, the invasion of Israel by Hamas, it's 1,290 days, precisely. And what's fascinating about that also, did we cover Jeremiah?
We just, yeah, we did.
And the Hamas word?
No.
No. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time over there, but if we go to Jeremiah. Thank you. Jeremiah, actually I think it's Jeremiah 6. That's the Nauvuz one. Okay, before I do Jeremiah 6, I want you to see how important Jeremiah is. We're not going to really spend any time in Jeremiah, but I would highly recommend studying Jeremiah for many reasons, but let's look at a couple. Everybody knows verse 5, right? This is a scripture mastery for missionaries and seminary students. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And we use this as a way to show foreordination and premortal life. But look at what he's told. I ordained thee a prophet unto the Jews, right? Because Jeremiah is the consummate Jewish prophet. He preaches to the southern kingdom of Judah. He preaches exclusively to the Jews. So that's got to be a mistake. Because that's goyim, and that means Gentiles. It's the same word. And Jeremiah is absolutely not a prophet to the Gentiles, right? But he is. So what does that tell us about Jeremiah? This is the guy. It's for us. Okay, now watch what he sees. I have set thee over the nations, Gentiles, goyim. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? Sound familiar? Let's see. I think I clicked the wrong one. Okay. An angel came down before Nephi, and he said unto Nephi, Nephi, what beholdest thou? Jeremiah, what seest thou? Nephi, what beholdest thou? Jeremiah says, I see a rod of an almond tree. Nephi says, I see a tree that is white with a rod going to it. So Jeremiah is seeing the same thing Lehi and Nephi saw, because Jeremiah is a prophet to the Gentiles or to the nations. In Jeremiah 4, we'll come back to that one later. So if we look at Jeremiah 6 from the perspective that Jeremiah is speaking to an ancient people, we're not going to be able to liken it to ourselves. But if we look at Jeremiah from the perspective that he's speaking to us, then here we know he's using code to speak to a particular side of the world. He says, O ye children of Benjamin. Where's the inheritance of Benjamin? It's southern kingdom of Judah. Gather yourselves to flee out of the midst of Jerusalem and blow the trumpet in Tekoa. If we jump over to Google Earth, we're going to look at where Tekoa is today. Okay, now why would you blow a trumpet? A warning, right? Now you could say, well, it's a warning or it's a announcement of war, because the warning is the sign of fire in Beth Hakerem, for evil appeareth from the north. So somebody's blowing a horn of war, and it's coming from Tekoa, and so they need to set up a signal fire because evil has appeared out of the north, which is typically associated with the Assyrian. And if we go over here to where Benjamin's inheritance is, Tekoa is in the Gaza Strip. It's, why am I not getting this right? This side over here. West Bank? Okay, thanks. And it's somewhere Usually you can kind of see it. It's called
There.
Tekoa today.
Yeah.
Do you see it? Oh, yeah, there it is, right
Just
there.
below Bethlehem.
Tekoa. So some sort of invasion is coming from the west, and so set up the signal fire and tell everybody to basically get ready, prepare for war, because they will come at noon and at night to destroy the palaces of Benjamin, or in other words, Jerusalem and Judah. The Lord has hew ye down trees, which is symbolic of people, cast a mount against Jerusalem. This is the city to be visited. Okay, what's this lead to? And this is all basically foreshadowing of Armageddon and the destruction of Jerusalem in several different moments throughout history. But in our day, it would be the final war that leads to, if we liken it to ourselves, right, it'd be the final war of Armageddon. As a fountain casteth out her waters, so she casteth out her wickedness. Violence and spoil is heard in her. Okay, who is she? She is Jerusalem. So let's go take a look again at Jeremiah. Get rid of those darn ads. Let's try that. Jeremiah. Six. Let's do Hebrew, so we can look at it verse by verse. We'll go to 7. We'll get our comparison. Violence will be found in her. And there is the Hebrew word for violence.
Hamas.
So all of these, I mean, you know, when we see these things kind of for what they are in art, and when we liken them to ourselves, they become quite informative. And these prophets, they connect and they warn us and they help us prepare. So, let's see, I knew I was going to go. I think I was going to do something with that little horn. Yeah, let me show you. No, I'll come back to that one. Let's go back over right there. Okay, so give me a moment. Whenever it does this, I have a hard time. Although sometimes I look at these, I'm like, oh, what did I have there? I haven't done that one for a while. I do actually remember why I put this in here. Oh, wow, that's good. Oh, man. Okay. So, yeah, let's do that. All right. If we believe Daniel and Jeremiah and all these prophets are kind of leading us into our time, and we look at, did I just skip right over Daniel 12? That's what I did, didn't I? That's what I did. No, I did. I covered how it was 1,290 days, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we look at these guys kind of projecting right into what appears to be 2020, right? Not only kind of George H.W. Bush, but some of them who are pushing us right into 2020, possibly seeing the closure of the temples and the invasion of Israel. And what I find interesting about the invasion of Israel is that we all know this concept of Armageddon, right? The last battle. And October 7th is now being used all over the world in protests as a cry for justice and war. Okay, so October 7th isn't just kind of the day they invaded, it's actually being held up on signs and chants now as a symbol of a conflict that will not end well. Right? And I don't know how much good is going to come of what is building in the Middle East right now around Jerusalem. Unfortunately, we have prophecies around that. So rather than staying in 2020, I'm going to back up like 20 years, okay? And I want to go to President Hinckley in a talk called Living in the Fullness of Times in 2001. He says the era in which we live is the fullness of time spoken of in scriptures. And look at what he says about this prophecy. Let's go back right here. Before the great and terrible day of the Lord, the hearts of the children have to be turned to the fathers and the fathers to the children. This is in Joseph Smith history. These are two really important prophecies that have to be fulfilled. Moroni says before the Lord can come, or Malachi and the prophecy of Joel. And well, here's President Hinckley saying both are fulfilled in 2001. Did I get the other ones? I didn't, did I? No, I did. There it is right there. The hearts of men have turned to their fathers in fulfillment of the words of Malachi, and the vision of Joel has been fulfilled, wherein he declared, I will shew wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. Now this is October 2001. What happened a month earlier? September 11th, where there was blood and fire and pillars of smoke, and President Hinckley gets up and says, prophecy fulfilled. He then says it is the terrorist organizations that must be ferreted out and brought down. We of this church know something of such groups. The Book of Mormon speaks of Gadianton robbers, a vicious, oath-bound, and secret organization bent on evil and destruction. Did we do this one last night?
No.
Okay, good. I'm mixing like my nights. And they, in their day, they did all in their power by whatever means available to bring down the church. We see the same thing in the present situation. That's, I don't really mean this, okay? Don't get alarmed. That's crazy. Why is that crazy? Because 9/11 didn't have anything to do with the church. But he just said it did. Am I wrong? Why would he say that?
Because he's a prophet.
Yeah, because he's a prophet. And President Hinckley was not an alarmist. He was about as positive as you could ever get. He was a great PR man. He was a great speaker. And here he is saying, we understand exactly what this is. And it's directed at bringing down the church. And we see the same thing in the present situation. Now, even if President Hinckley wasn't meaning to say, hey, like this was directed at us, maybe he's just kind of looking at all of us and saying, kind of shaking us a little bit. Wake up. Get ready, right? Because this is a sign. Okay, now, if President Hinckley is correct, that this thing is the same as the Gadianton robbers, who gives us the great warning of the Gadianton robbers in the Book of Mormon? This is Moroni. Moroni is picking up where his father left off. He has decided to put the gold plate, the 24 plates of the Jaredites, into the Book of Mormon. And he says, look, when you see these things, it means the sword of justice is hanging over you right now. And it will fall upon you to your overthrow and destruction if you shall suffer these things to be. When ye shall see these things come among you, ye shall awake to a sense of your awful situation because of this secret combination, which shall be among you, or woe be unto it because of the blood of them who have been slain. For they cry from the dust for vengeance upon it, and also upon those who built it up. Now, I used to wonder, what does that mean? What does it mean somebody, there's not enough dead saints to cry from the ground in the modern era for us to worry about, right? So we're safe. Except what if this is not really about martyrdom deaths? What if this is about the people who established the first branches in Australia? And they didn't do all that hard work so that we could get comfortable and lazy and live in Babylon. They did all that hard work here so that your children could grow up in the gospel and love the Lord and serve him. And can you imagine what they are saying when they see us in America and you here not living up to your potential as the house of Israel? Do you think maybe they're asking the Lord to end things a little bit early before it can go too bad, right? I mean, I hope not, right? But I apply that to my country. I think that's applicable in my country. We have tons of stories about pioneers who did amazing things. So, what do we do with that? All right. I don't know. I covered this yesterday with the Maseroth and the Latotes and the Lord of Sabaoth. I don't think I covered this though. Look at that real quick, because we're how much time do we have? Okay, we got a little bit of time. Good. Well, yeah, we got a little bit of time. What I want to do is I want to cover some signs that happen that lead up to the Book of Mormon as a real awesome parable for our day. And to do that, we've already kind of talked about what these lights and signs are, but look at the terms seasons. There's the Hebrew word moadim. Leviticus talks about feasts in their seasons, so feasts in their moadim, but look at the word for feasts, moadeh. And an appointed time is a moadam. So a season is a moadim, an appointed time is a moadam, and a feast is a moadeh. So what does that say? Like, what's a feast? Name some feasts. The Lord. Passover. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the Holy Convocation of Trumpets, I think is what the Lord calls it in Scripture. And we hold a general conference during 2 feast times. Sukkot was a feast, the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, what is Adam-on-Diamond? Is Adam-on-Diamond the second coming?
It's a place.
It's a place. What happens at that place?
Keys are given back to Adam.
Keys are given.
Is it sacrament meeting?
Sacrament meeting. That's a marriage feast. Okay, is that an appointed time, or is that the day that no man can know the hour of? It's an appointed time. The thing that no man can know the hour of is the second coming of the Lord in glory. So if Adam-on-Diamond and maybe even the Mount of Olives are appointed times, then that means they are moadeh, moadam, and are scheduled in certain moadim. Joseph incorporates these concepts in the Doctrine and Covenants, particularly in D&C 88. We're not going to spend a lot of time there, but we will. Okay, now I'm going to keep asking you this tonight because I'm not going to remember. Did we cover the new millennium a little bit last night?
No.
Okay, so look at that quote right there. Officially, the new millennium will begin at 0 hour Greenwich Mean Time, also referred to as Coordinated Universal Time, on January 1st, 2001. But that's incorrect, right? What's the error in that? The new millennium really began on January 1st, 2000, right? Except it didn't.
No.
That would be the incorrect date, but the whole world celebrated a new millennium on January 1st, 2000 for some strange reason. I have honestly no idea why. Why did we do that?
Because everything went to zeros in our calendars.
You know, we went to a zero-based calendar, which is like mind-boggling. And it wasn't like you guys did it too, right? It wasn't just us. Was it just us in America?
No.
How do you explain that? I mean, you could say Y2K, you could blame it on Prince. Okay? But why would we do that? Okay, now look at the Book of Mormon. So what did we change the reckoning of our time? We did. We changed the reckoning of our time from a correct assessment. I mean, we did that actually a long time ago because January is not actually the first month of the year. Right? I mean, it's basically March or April around Passover. It is the real beginning of the year. In spring, the Lord says the month of Abib, or the time of Abib, which is spring, or the month of Abib, which would be the first month in spring, is the new year. The Nephites did the same thing. They changed the reckoning of their time when they saw a great sign in the first year of their new millennium. So just like the Nephites, we changed the reckoning of our time. Even President Hinckley acknowledged this in a talk that he gave. Look at the date up top. October 2000, and he called 2000 a great millennial year. So not only did the world change the reckoning of its time, we changed. The church acknowledged the change and did a solemn assembly dedicating a new conference center in the great millennial year. Why would we do that? Well, because there was a great sign given in April of 2000, and it was a sign given over Palmyra the night before the dedication of the Palmyra Temple. On Thursday, April 6th, it would have been what is known as the first day of the first month of the Hebrew year. It would be the seventh day of Passover, and in oral tradition, this was the day that God parted the Red Sea. Palmyra is quite a special place. It means the city of palms, and that is the same as Jericho in the Bible. Jericho's name means the city of palms. And when you think about Jericho and the meaning of Jericho, Jericho is the lowest elevation on the earth. And when we learn the parable of the Good Samaritan, we learn of a man who departs from the holy city, Jerusalem, up on the hill, and comes down towards Jericho and falls amongst thieves. And a Samaritan comes along, picks him up, carries him down to an inn. Well, guess where the Lord starts his final journey? He starts in Jericho, and then he ascends to Jerusalem on a colt to palm leaves and shouts of Hosanna. So as Adam falls, the Lord ascends to atone and deliver mankind. And this is the place that we have gathered around the world, right? In one of the first ever events in the history of the church. If you have a temple recommend, you can get a satellite broadcast and join a solemn assembly where you will hold something in similitude of a palm leaf and shout Hosanna on April 6, 2000. Now, unlike the first coming of the Lord, the second coming of the Lord is not heralded by a great light. It is heralded by destruction. And the destruction comes because the bridegroom comes, and the world has to be cleansed to prepare for the bridegroom. Every day you can walk outside and you can see a parable of the bridegroom every single day. It's the sun coming up out of the west in similitude of Christ and descending into the east, and it's accompanied at all times by a heavenly pageant of stars and constellations.
That's right at the front.
What's that?
Coming out of the east.
Ross in the
Did I say it wrong?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
We're down under.
Oh, yeah. I think we actually do have the sun rising in the east in America, too. We're not that different.
We had to be different.
So if we go to this day, I think I explained this last night. In the Jewish Mazarot, or the Hebrew Mazarot, there are 8 grand planets. And very rarely will you see 5 of them align in one night. Okay, that means it's time for a break. But on this night, you will see all 7 of the planetary bodies except Earth, and Mars is hiding behind Jupiter's name right up there. So on April 5th, 2000, you're going to see all the grand planets of the Hebrew Mazzaroth, followed by all of the constellations visible in one night. So you see the entire Mazzaroth in one night, which is very rare. You'll see Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricornus, and the sun will end in Pisces at 9 a.m. as the church begins to dedicate the Palmyra Temple. Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and pick up from there.